sitting on an early Friday morning in a small waiting room as I waited to get my oil change. And I was mentally preparing myself for this conversation that I knew was about to happen in a few minutes. And anybody who's had an oil change before, you know exactly this conversation I'm talking about, because any minute, someone was going to come walking through that door with a dirty air filter in hand. And I know nothing about cars. And so I'm forced with this decision of, do I believe them and do I just pay for the new air filter? Or do I try to come up with an excuse or a reason why I'm not going to move forward? And I never liked that feeling of feeling like I'm being sold. And just then, the door swings open and in walks a man named George. I can see it written on his name tag. And he sits down across from me, super relaxed. He says, "Mr. Harris, that's the new body style." I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Awesome truck." He's like, "How do you like it?" I'm like, "I love it." We start this conversation. I'm like, "Well, I don't want to get too friendly because then I'm going to feel more likely to say yes and move forward with the upsell." But then he stops me and says, "Hey, Mr. Harris, I know this is your first time getting an oil change with us, so I just want you to know that we do things very differently here." He's like, "I'm not going to sell you anything." He's like, "I just want to take a couple minutes and tell you exactly what I see. I'll give you some options, and then you decide what it is that you want to do." It caught me a little off guard. And he holds up the air filter in one hand. He said, "Hey, air filter, it is dirty." It's like, "You don't have to replace it now." It's like, "It would be a good idea, but if you want to get a little bit more time out of it, we can always do it next time. Not a problem." And then the other hand holds up a bottle of oil. And he said, "The oil you're using now is fine. You do not need to change it. But if you are going to be taking your family on a road trip this summer, or if you want to just avoid this extreme Arizona heat, it's like it might be a good idea to upgrade to synthetic. Again, completely your choice. Just let us know what you want to do." And then he stopped talking. No pressure, no pitch, no persuasion, just total transparency. You know, I didn't even hesitate. I told him, "Hey, why don't you switch out the air filter and let's upgrade to synthetic?" So I went from not wanting to buy anything to buying two things. But you know what? I felt good about it. I walked away feeling like it was my choice. You know, and I'm not going to lie, as he walked out of the room, I remember thinking, like, what just happened? But I got sold. But I made the choice. I felt free to choose, and I think that's what made all the difference. And so I thought about that a lot throughout the rest of the day, and specifically as it relates to my own business. And I asked myself the question, do my customers feel free to choose? Or do they feel like they are being sold? And it's a question I'd ask anyone here today. You know, in whatever business you have or wherever you work, do your customers feel free to choose? Or do they feel like they're being sold? See, I think this idea of being sold on something, it's not unique to the auto repair industry. It happens everywhere. I'll give you a better example. I want you to think about the last time you went to the dentist. Okay, and maybe you're seeing a dentist for the first time, you move to a new city, and you don't know them, they don't know you. There's that forced kind of awkward conversation that happens at the beginning, getting to know each other. And then before you know it, you're leaning back, right? And they're looking inside your mouth, judging you based on your flossing habits. And in some way or form, there's this fear of, am I going to be sold? And then they start an MO on number 2, got a DO on number 3, recession on number 6. And to be honest, what is going through your head as you're hearing all that? Here we go again, right? Do I really need this? You know, can I trust this person? You know, is this something I really need to do? Or what if now's not the right time to move forward with something? How do I say no without it looking like I don't care about my overall health? And I know it's a silly example, but you know, I think it's a good example as you're at the dentist, as they're looking inside the mouth, as you're sitting there wondering, is this stuff that I really need to do? it's all really, it's the same story, right? Whether it's teeth or it's air filters or it's oil, it's the same story. And it's that story of like, does this really need to be done? Or is it something that can be put off for another time? So as a cosmetic dentist, I find myself in this unique position because I feel like I sit at this intersection between needs and wants, healthcare and aesthetics. And there's this big gray area in the middle where, whether I like it or not, there's some aspect of sales happening in my business. And so for years, I focused on creating a better sales process. We hired consultants, coaches. I tried to figure out the best tactics and strategies, the things to say that would get people to say yes. We even, believe it or not, we even trained on when people say no, the best things that you can say to get them to say yes, which seems so crazy. But that's where all the energy was. It was all on the sales process of getting people to say yes. And I had the credentials, I had the facts. But oftentimes we would get the same response back from people. Let me get back to you. Let me talk to my spouse. Let me look at my calendar. And what frustrated me the most wasn't the no. It wasn't people saying no, but it was this fact that I always felt like I was selling something, and I didn't like that feeling. And so going back to my experience with George getting the oil change, that experience for me was like, I call it the awakening, because I quite literally woke up to the fact that the way I had been doing things for so many years was wrong. I put so much effort into the sales process, and what I should have been focusing on was the buyer's process. I should have been focusing on what was most important to the person in front of me. And when we focus on the buyer's process, and I know it's going to seem like they're the same thing, but they're actually very different. When we think about the sales process versus the buyer's process, and the best way that I can explain this is just to give an example in my own business. So the sales process, or what I call the old way, or the way we used to do it, was that somebody out there was sitting at home, self-conscious of their smile, and doing nothing because they don't know who to trust, they don't know what things cost, they don't even know what their options are. And so we would market to them and wait until they pick up the phone call, and then they would call in. And then we'd have a conversation with them on the phone, try to get them to schedule. Then once they were there, then we'd go in and we'd work our whole sales process, get to know them, lean them back, make a list of the stuff that needs to be done, put them in another room with somebody else that can go over all the pricing, right? Does this sound familiar? And then all of it's done without the spouse even being there. So they leave with a piece of paper and a long list of things that need to be done. That was the sales process. And when we flipped it and said, hey, what if we just stopped doing that and just focus on the buyer's process? What if we took away all the friction in that process and just made it really easy for people? Everything changed. So we took on our website, on social media pages, and we just put a link that said, hey, interested in improving your smile? Upload a smile photo, tell us what you want to change, and we'll get back to you for free with your options. And my team thought I was crazy, but this is what we did. And so we started this new process, and shortly after we did this, I sat my team down and said, hey, all we're really doing here is focusing less on conversion and more on connection. And so when you focus less on conversion and more on connection, it changes the process. And shortly after we started doing this, Kendall reached out. So this is the first person to reach out that was going through our new process, right? A process focused completely on the customer and not on the business. And Kendall reached out to me, and her message was, Dr. Harris, I am 22. I go to Arizona State University. I am self-conscious of my smile. I'm at a time in my life where I should be out, having fun and socializing, but I'm doing nothing because, I don't feel good about how things look. And I've had 3 different consults, and everybody's telling me different things. Like, I just want to know if you can help me. And so in getting this message, it was really easy to fall back into this old sales process mindset because I got the message and my first thought was to send her a message back and say, call the office and schedule a consult. But then I stopped and I'm like, wait, that's the old way. What would be the new way? What if I just sat down and recorded a video for Kendall and let her know what her options were and talked about costs, talked about benefits, pros, cons, and sent her this video without her even having to come in and see me in the practice? What if I did that now and then invited her to come in when she was ready? And so that's what I did. I remember sitting down. This is the first virtual consult, video consult I ever recorded, where I remember opening up the laptop and just speaking into the laptop screen, saying, like, Kendall, I can help you. And I proceeded to go through all of her options and tell her exactly what needed to be done. 2 weeks later, she shows up at the practice, ready to move forward. It's been, I think, almost 8 years now. She's married. She had a baby, then she had twins. I just saw her about a month ago, and just a completely new woman full of confidence. And I know that if I would have taken her through that traditional sales process, that she wouldn't be where she is today. And I wouldn't be where I am today, because that experience, like, it opened my eyes to this whole world of possibility of what happens when I use my talents to serve people instead of trying to sell people. So the question I would ask you then, if you're seeing a slowdown in your business, what if it's not the product? What if it's not the pitch? What if it's not your price? Like, what if it's just truly your perspective? What would happen if you dropped the sales process and focused more on a buyer's process? What would it do to change your business? And so my challenge is that instead of making a pivot in your business, because that's what we're talking about today, instead of making a pivot during times of uncertainty and trying to come up with a new business model or do something different, what if you just pivot your perspective? And what if you start treating your customers differently? What if we focused more on connection and less on conversion? And so I came up with what I call the connection code. And this is an exercise that I do before every patient that I see now. It's a very simple exercise. When I go through it with you, it's going to seem very simple, but I want to share it with you because it's made all the difference in the world in keeping me focused on making the most important thing the most important thing. Okay, so step one, pivot my perspective. Before I go into that room, I actually have to mentally say, okay, what's most important to them? Not like, what do I want to get them to buy or what should they do? Pivot my perspective, put myself in their shoes. Based on where they're at in their life right now, what's most important to them? Once I can get in that right mindset, then I step into the room, and that's when I can sit down and just ask questions. Hey, what's most important to you today? In a perfect world, if you walk out of here getting exactly what you want, what does that look like? And then listen to the responses, but then also listen to what's underneath those responses, the fears, the doubts, the insecurities. And once I have a pretty good idea of where they're at and what I can do to help them, then I share options with total transparency, with no attachment to the outcome. And what I mean by that is, like, whether they move forward with me or not, like, it doesn't matter. What matters to me, success for me, is, did I give them everything that I had? Was I able to share everything possible to help them get what they want? Then I feel complete. And so instead of trying to guess what their budget is, I just tell them, like, hey, I don't want to try to guess what your budget is. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to explain everything, and then you decide what makes the most sense to you. We talk about options. We talk about trade-offs. One of the things I do now that I learned from George is the first thing I say after I've asked and listened to what it is they have to say, I'll tell them, like, hey, we do things very differently here. Instead of trying to sell you something, I'm just going to explain all of your options, and then you decide what makes the most sense to you. I believe that pressure creates confusion and transparency creates freedom. So set them free. I let them be free to choose what's most important to them. But also it sets you free from ever feeling like you have to sell anything ever again. And at some point during their visit, when those conversations do come up, I try to let them know, like, hey, if you have questions, just ask. That's what this time is for, so we can work through these things. The most important thing to me is that you walk out of here knowing exactly what your options are. In a world filled with AI and automation, where attention is expensive and trust is rare, I believe that human connection becomes the greatest advantage that we have. I truly believe that. And I don't believe that trust is built by persuasion. I think it's built by connection. And so before people trust what you have to offer, they have to trust that you see them. And when they do, that decision isn't forced, it feels natural. Human connection doesn't close deals. I believe that it opens relationships. Thank you.